Hello, this is Donna Carroll from Love Consciousness, and today my reflection is on something that I have been working through quite intensely for at least a few weeks now. It's been a big one for me, and it's around the subject of triggers, being triggered, bringing awareness into your triggered response. Witnessing someone else being triggered, and everything around this fight or flight response, this triggered response that we no doubt have all experienced and perhaps are still experiencing from time to time. Now, first of all, I'd just like to say these are just my experiences. I share my experiences. I share them because they may be helpful. So, as always, just take what resonates with you and discard the rest. So, what I've been working through is understanding my own personal triggers at a much deeper level. Not only the triggers, but the defense mechanisms that is built around these triggers. Now, the reason why I am making this recording is because during this investigation into my own triggered response, that I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute, I realised how important it is at this time to allow awareness to come into these responses, to come into the unconscious behaviours and patterns and defences that are created around these responses, and how these unconscious patterns and mechanisms really affect so much of our personal reality. And it's been quite an eye-opening experience for me. If I'm honest, it's been a little bit like opening Pandora's box. And the reason for that is the trigger that I experienced myself firsthand was a defence against a massive wounds and fear that I actually didn't realise was there. I was unconscious of. Now, this particular trigger that I experienced, which I'll explain, I hadn't experienced this level of being triggered, and I tried to work it out in, say, 10 years. So it was a little bit of a shock in the moment. But on reflection, I realised that I have been experiencing this particular trigger, but just in a much more subtle sense. So the situation that triggered me, quite a simple situation. I was having a conversation. I said something that upset the person that I was with, and the person I was with was instantly triggered, upset by what I had said. And they wanted to just have a little bit of a rant. Not shouting or anything, just I could feel a little bit of charge in their words, and they wanted to just have a bit of a rant to tell me why what I'd just said was wrong. Now, this is where I was completely surprised, because this energy that was in their rant, and it wasn't anything over the top, completely triggered me. I went into a freeze response. Now, in the moment of going into the freeze response that I experienced, I could feel my whole system closing down. I became frozen. I lost my ability to speak, and I was struggling to just pull any kind of words from my logical mind in order to diffuse the situation, which is all I really wanted to do. I just felt like I wanted to diffuse the situation quickly, but I didn't have the ability to do that. eventually I managed to sum up a few words, which were something along the lines of, I'm really triggered, and I would really appreciate it if we could just have this discussion a little bit later on, when I don't feel so triggered. And that was literally all I could muster up. Um, this seemed to trigger the person I was with more, because what they really wanted to do was just have it out, have a debate. And because I could sense that they were even more triggered, I just instantly asked them to leave. Again, which upset them. And then I was left sat there, reeling, in this response, wondering what the hell had happened. Now, as the days followed, I tried to examine this response, because, one of the things that I do as part of my development, if you like, is I'm always clearing out what no longer serves me. I'm always looking to clear out a hidden wound, discover another unconscious aspect of myself, something that isn't serving me. And so I knew that this was an opportunity to get to a wound that was behind the trigger. There's always a wound there. There's always something behind it. And I know this. So that was my intention now, was to see what was behind this reaction. Now here's where it got interesting. Number one, I realised that every single time I tried to bring myself back into the trigger, into the moment where I was frozen, so that I could understand what was happening, I couldn't do it. My mind wouldn't let me go there. So I'd bring myself into that moment, and next thing I know, my mind was off somewhere else. And then I'd say, whoa, what's going on here? And I'd refocus and I'd bring myself back into the moment, and my mind was off somewhere else. And this went on and on. And so then I suddenly had this realization of why these reactions and responses are so unconscious. Simply because the mind will not let you go there. The mind will do whatever it can, whatever it takes, to not face it, to not feel it. And so it was quite a challenge just going in to unpick it, if you like. The other question I asked myself, which was interesting, was my reaction to the situation proportional to the situation? And even though somewhere logically I knew that it was completely not proportional to the situation that I found myself in, there was no reason for me to be so deeply triggered. I wasn't in any danger. The person that was triggered, that was having a bit of a rant, wasn't even overly aggressive. So I found this interesting, that my mind was struggling to even come to terms with this simple fact, that this situation didn't call for that level of reaction, if you like. So I'm beginning to dive a little bit deeper into all of this, and really trying to get in and understand what's going on. Why did I react that way? Where does this come from? So this was the next question I was asking myself. Where does this come from? And it blows my mind, really, because I'm someone that thinks of themselves as fairly aware. The work that I do as a therapist for years, and now as a teacher of hypnotherapy and NLP and consciousness, means that I understand these things, or at least I felt like I understood these things. But when you begin to explore through experience, it's very different from theory. And it's not as though I've not identified defense mechanisms in the past, but this one was so deep and so crippling that it was very challenging for me to get in there and actually look at it from any kind of logical sense. And so then I began to realise, why these things remain unconscious, why these things are unconscious. And I kind of got this visual of consciousness, if you like, awareness and consciousness, as this expanded state, and you're in conversation and you can, you have the resources to problem solve and, gather information and verbalize that information and have that little debate if necessary, if that's what it is that you've chosen to do. And this consciousness that you have access to, when you're triggered, I saw it just going to the size of a pin dot, and suddenly you have access to nothing, and you're just in pure survival, pure reaction survival mode, if you like. When I began to really ask myself the question, where did this come from? I then began to realise that I had been reacting this way my entire life. And so this is what I then found mind-blowing, like, why could I not see this before? And if you think about fight or flight, we talk about fight and flight a lot, but we often miss freeze. And I believe that in our society, in our culture, we probably suffer from freeze more than we do fight or flight. And the reason being is that it's not appropriate to run away or fight in so many situations that we're faced with. And so we freeze. And my particular situation was growing up in a household with parents that were quite aggressive. My mum loved to scream and shout, no judgment on her. But that's just the way that it was. And so when my mum would scream and shout, which was a lot, and sometimes she would even physically attack, you can't run away. As a child, I couldn't run away. I wouldn't have been able to run away. That would have made the situation worse for me. And you can't fight your mum. So what have you got left? You've got freeze. And so even though I hadn't been triggered to the extent in which I recently experienced it, I realised that I was mildly triggered with the freeze response in a much more subtle way, moving through my entire adulthood. I also then began to realise that there was many unconscious controlling type behaviours and structures and walls and barriers that I had created around avoiding being triggered in this way. And so suddenly I'm realising how protective I am of myself due to wanting to avoid being triggered in this way, wanting to avoid conflict at all costs. Being highly scared of being in a situation where, for example, someone might raise their voice at me or something along, or anything along those lines. And so I found clever little tactics, really, is what I'm trying to say, of just avoiding these situations altogether. If I see these personality traits in someone, for example, I just block them. I don't even give them the time of day. And so I wonder if you can sense what I'm trying to say here, is that suddenly, because of going into this trigger and understanding it, I'm realizing that I've built my whole life and my way of being and restricting myself in so many ways so that I don't have to re-experience this particular trigger, which is very, very deep for me. So deep that I'm still working through the emotions that have been unleashed as a result of dipping in, leaning in to this response to see what is underneath it. So much fear, which I'm still processing. So many other realizations have come from really exploring this particular trigger of mine, releasing the wounds, beginning to heal the wounds that have been hidden behind the triggered response. But one of the things that's really fascinated me is going back to our unconscious behaviors, our unconscious reactions. And I laugh as someone that does and teaches hypnotherapy, because we'd all like to think we're really highly conscious beings. But here's the thing. The parts of you that you're unconscious of, you're just not aware of. That's why it's called unconscious. And so we all have these aspects of us that when we move in to these unconscious patterns, that we cannot see them. We simply cannot see them. People around us, particularly if we're surrounded by people that have a good sense of awareness, will see these things within us, but we won't. They are our unconscious. And it got me thinking. Of how we can support ourselves and really, really diving in to all unconscious parts of ourselves. And if we could perhaps find a good close friend or some kind of partner that had awareness, and we could make a little deal with them, I guess, of pointing out and helping each other identify the parts of us that are unconscious. And if we're triggered by that, then great, because there it is, there's the gold right there. Each and every time we are triggered, it's pointing straight to the unconscious, the fear. And then obviously having to find ways in which we can then allow ourselves to lean into that. And as I said, that's not easy. I didn't find it easy. And I like to think I'm quite practiced at release work. I didn't find it easy. It's been a tough few weeks because I've had to allow myself to feel all the layers of fear that are still unfolding. And we're programmed to avoid fear. And so it gets really, really interesting, and what it's done for me is a complete shift in consciousness, in the sense of that now I'm in a place where I don't want to avoid being triggered. I'm being asked to pull down all of the barriers and the structures of defense and allow myself to be triggered. And even ask friends of mine to see if they can trigger me. Or link up with someone like an accountability partner and ask them to point out the unconscious aspects of me. And the reason being is because the sooner I can see the unconscious aspects of me that are at play, the sooner I can bring the awareness, the consciousness into the unconscious. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here. We are diving into the unconscious and making it conscious. And in the process of that, we are undoing all of the unconscious programming, the conditioning, the limiting beliefs, the fear that keeps us from being who we were truly designed to be. So I wonder if you could consider, instead of avoiding conflict, allow yourself to experience difficult people that rub you up the wrong way, or annoy you, or agitate you, or trigger you, because they are pointing straight to the aspects of yourself that need healing, that we need to let go of at this time. They are the program, the matrix, the false matrix, whatever you want to call it. It's not outside of us. It's an inside job. We're undoing the programming from the inside. And what a wonderful way to allow yourself to discover the unconscious aspects of you that need to go. So thank you for listening to my little reflection. I hope that made some sense. I don't plan these reflections. I don't plan what I'm going to say. I just let it flow. And so I never know how they're going to come out. But it felt really important. This feels like a huge wake-up call for me. And I'm quite excited to see what's at the other side of this for me. Because it literally, this particular response, when I managed to get behind it, it was like opening Pandora's box. There's so much stuff behind here. And as I said, that's not been easy. But I know that now the awareness is running through this aspect of myself that I'd kept so hidden for so many years, most of my life. And so it's not easy, but I know it's going to be worth it. And I'll be excited to share another reflection at the other side of the processing and the reintegration. So thank you for listening. So much love, and have a wonderful day wherever you are. Bye for now.